Hello and welcome to the Flying Frisbee podcast with me, Dominic Frisby. And this time last year, I received an email from a gentleman in New Orleans asking me if I would like to go out to New Orleans to speak at their gold conference that year. And never having been to New Orleans and having heard that it is, my friend used to write travel books, and he said that New Orleans, of all the places he'd been to in the world, New Orleans was the best. And having heard that, I thought, yes, I would like to go to New Orleans. And I'm delighted to say that my speech was so good, I've been invited back there this year. And the man who invited me, I'm speaking to now, his name is Brien Lundin, and he writes the Gold newsletter and he organises the New Orleans conference. And Brien, thanks very much for joining me. Thanks for coming on the show. And I suppose let's start by talking about the New Orleans conference, what it is, how long it goes on for, who you've got speaking, all that kind of thing. The roster of guests you've got speaking this year is phenomenal.
Well, thank you, Dominic. Great to be with you. And absolutely, certainly your speech and your presentations on our panels last year was so great that we wanted to invite you back again. But I think it's also fair to say that you enjoyed your experience in New Orleans, both for the city and the conference, that, if I remember correctly, you practically begged to be invited back. But we had already made the decision to invite you back because your quality of your content was so good. But yeah, people don't realize, I find it that a lot of people don't realize, but the New Orleans Investment Conference is actually the oldest investment conference in the world today, ongoing every year, that has not been interrupted by a hurricane. But every year since 1974, this is our 49th year. And we've had some remarkable speakers grace our stage over the years. We've had Ayn Rand in her last public performance or public presentation. We've had Lady Margaret Thatcher speak. We've had Milton Friedman, F.A. Hayek, Alan Greenspan, Barry Goldwater, yada, yada. List goes on and on and on.
And now Dominic Frisby.
And now Dominic Frisby. We're putting you right up there. We're trying to decide before or after Lady Thatcher in the list. We appreciate your input on that, by the way. But yeah, it is it is an event, an experience, as I know you now know, that has to be really experienced to be understood. And it's a wonderful gathering in New Orleans, a great city. Great feeling of camaraderie, an intellectual energy in the atmosphere, and a lot of wonderful speakers that you get the chance to actually meet in the halls, socialize with, and ask your questions. These days, I have steered clear from a lot of the big political speakers and are trying to fill out the speaker roster with some bench strength of what I think are some of the more remarkable analysts out there today. You know, one of the things I think about a lot is that we are in extraordinary times. You know, none of the stuff that's going on today is normal at all. And yet the talking heads on the financial media and news shows talk about it like it is, but nothing that we're going through today is normal. And I think that extraordinary times bring out extraordinary people to try to explain them. And we've seen that through social media, through Twitter/X. There's a lot of great thinkers out there. And I read everything, I watch everything, I know who's good and who isn't. And I've gotten just about everybody out there that I think is the best at what they do. You know, if I could go over some of the speakers.
Yeah, please do. I just want to ask you, why have you avoided the political stuff?
Well, it's everything has gotten so, everybody's entrenched in their own ruts politically, either one or the other. And I find that if I get a political speaker, I enthrall 50% of my audience and piss off the other 50%. You know, everything, people think that ideas are bullets these days or slaps in the face, that anyone espousing a particular point of view is almost literally a physical affront and you know, in an assault. And in that kind of an atmosphere, from a political end, although we do feature a lot of libertarian viewpoints, we do focus and have always focused over the decades on personal liberty, sound money. a lot of the viewpoints and approaches that I think your audience would appreciate. And as you can see, and as you can gather from our speaker list, it is very much a libertarian, bit of conservative political viewpoint. But yeah, it's really divisive these days. It's amazing what you get, that even those who preach to the choir, if they have one note out of tune, they're pilloried. So it hasn't been, I think, very helpful to our attendance in recent years.
I've got you. So tell us who some of the speakers that you've got.
Well,
is Dave Collum coming this year?
Dave Collum will be there. We're calling him the mayor of the green room. He tends to plop himself in a chair in the green room behind the stage and have us and talk to all the speakers and anybody who comes in. Sometimes I have to get out of the green room just to clear my head, because it's amazing the tsunami of intellectual energy that comes from him.
Yeah, you see, I had no idea who he was. And I watched his speech and I thought, God, this guy's great. Yeah, and then I met him in the green room and he's all full of praise for my speech, which obviously you like to hear. Yeah. And then we got talking and I just absolutely loved him. And then I got back to England and a guy I know, Tim Price, who writes quite a popular newsletter over here, was going, I just love this guy, Dave Collum. He's released his annual letter. It's the best thing you could possibly read. And I was like, I was on a stage with him 2 weeks ago. So he was quite jealous of that.
Yeah, he's absolutely brilliant. And like I say, sometimes overwhelming, because he'll have very controversial opinions and he will back it up with evidence to 3 decimal places. So it's really, really enlightening to even just to talk with him. So yeah, Dave is coming and we've got him in a great panel. We've got him in a presentation and, he roams the halls and just fascinating. He's worth the price of admission all by himself.
Yes, Rick Rule?
Rick Rule will be there. Rick is a regular, has been for decades, and is, as I know is renowned as probably the foremost speculator in resource stocks that the world's ever seen. So Rick actually retired from his brokerage, so he's no longer regulated and under any regulatory umbrellas. So he's very freewheeling and free speaking these days. He's the unmuzzled Rick Rule, and that's worth seeing as well.
I had a great moment of pride last year, Brien, because I went to lunch with Brent Cook. Yeah. I sat there and Rick Rule walked into the restaurant and Brent said, "Oh, Rick, do you want to come and have lunch join us for lunch?" So I was like very excited, number one, to meet Rick. And then Brent and I were talking about this tin stock that we own. Rick and I were talking. Rick and I started talking about this tin stock that we realized we both own in Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC, Alphamin. And we started talking about the grades and the potential. And we just saw Brent secretly writing down the name of the stock on a napkin. So that was quite a nice little thrill for us.
Great. Always be promoting. Always be talking your own book, Dominic. Rick is another one of those. He's so smart. And he's a longtime friend of mine over decades, but still he blows me away. It's hard to keep up with him. He's so smart on so many different topics, especially in the metals and the resource industry. I've got Matt Taibbi coming. I think he is the most important journalist of our generation. Exposing with the Twitter files and exposing government censorship efforts with COVID and the like. I've got.
I couldn't believe how those Twitter files got ignored. Some of the stuff he was coming out with. It's outrageous.
Unbelievable is, censorship by omission of so many things in the media today. And that makes, alternative media like your podcast, like our conference, it makes it so much more important these days because it's the only place you can really, get countering views and make up your own mind. Mm-hmm. And we're focusing on well thought out views. While we're talking about, I'm just looking down my list of speakers. I was very happy. I've got Konstantin Kizin coming.
Really?
Yeah. And not a lot of people on this side of the pond really know who he is. And as I'm explaining it to people, I say, well, we have a stand-up comic from Britain, Constant Kids. And then there's Dominic Frisby. There's another stand-up comic from Britain. I feel like having my own panel. If you can suggest some others, maybe I'll do that. It's not too late.
I had my birthday party last week and Constantine was there.
I've never met him. I'm supposed to talk to him, I think, later this week in a call similar, or a podcast similar to this. But yeah, I was very impressed with, of course, that speech at the Oxford Union and a lot of other things he's done. So very happy to get him.
Oh, well, as soon as this call's over, I'm going to text him.
Good. Tell him I'm a good guy and it's a great event. I think he had to look at our website to kind of convince him because, again, not that many people know who we are despite all the time we've been in the business.
Okay, I will do. I mean, Constantine is so articulate and he's so centered. But he's more from the sort of political free speech, that side of the argument than he is from the financial side of the argument, but he is so articulate.
Well, I don't know if you realize it, but I have him, Matt Taibbi, and you on our geopolitical panel this year.
Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah. I'm delighted.
You're going to have a great time, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we cover macroeconomics, we cover geopolitics, we drill down to the various asset classes. But on the macroeconomic end of it, we've got some extraordinary speakers. We've got Jim Rickards, we've got Danielle DiMartino Booth, George Gammon, Brent Johnson. We have Lynn Alden in person.
Oh, yeah.
Here. And I think she's the best, not only out there today, but I think she's one of the best analysts I've ever seen in all my years in the industry. And she rarely does public appearances. So she will be there in person this year.
She's great. She's just written a new book, hasn't she?
Yeah, she has. And I have it sitting on my bedstand in my stack of books awaiting to be read. But I'm looking forward to that. She really is remarkable. We have Peter Bookbard coming. Think he's one of the best analysts out there. He's kind of the resident contrarian on CNBC. We have Jim Stack, who's a longtime friend of mine, who has accurately predicted every bubble, every bust, and every bull market over the last, I'd say, 40 years. He's just the most accurate analyst, market forecaster I've ever seen.
What's he saying now?
He is predicting, I think he's got the warning flags out right now, which I think are pretty accurate as far as I can see. We have Peter Schiff, we have Jim Arroyo, Jim Arroyo used to be on CNBC, and I think he's a bit of a, how should I put it? He doesn't hold his tongue. So now he moved from CNBC to Fox Business, and where he's a little bit more freewheeling. We have Tabby Costa coming. He's another brilliant analyst, has especially in the resource space, but macroeconomics as well. James Lavish, a lot of people don't know of him, but if you look up him on Twitter, you'll see some really remarkable threads explaining very deep macroeconomic topics in very clear, cogent fashion. So I'm very happy we got him. I think he's going to be a big hit. We've got Adam Taggart coming to direct some of our panels, and then just dozens and dozens of analysts in the resource space, metals and mining, and really every other asset class out there.
All right. And how does Brien, how does one, if we want to come, what do we do? What's the procedure?
Well, I believe that you have a link of your own that you can give people in your show notes or whatever. But other than that, it's simply neworleansconference.com is easy way to get us. It's very easy to find.
Okay, I'll put a link in the description, folks. If you're watching, I'll put a link in the description.
Yeah. And you'll get all the details of the agenda, the speakers, the history of the event, what we're going to cover. And one of the big advantages of this event is New Orleans itself. It's a lot of fun. We try to bring the city, the ambiance, and the unique entertainment and cuisine of New Orleans into the conference, but you also get the chance to go out and experience it yourself.
What a great city. And that's one of the most underrated things about the city. Obviously, everywhere you go, you listen to music. Every few steps you take, there's some new guy playing brilliant music just on the street. But also the food is so good. Oh,
Yeah,
my goodness.
the food is a great attraction. We kind of take it for granted here, but people come from all over the world. And on the music, the artists that live here go overseas and they'll play to packed crowds and 5,000-10,000 seat theaters, and then they'll come to New Orleans and they'll be in a bar where there's 20 people in the audience. It's amazing to me how I guess we take it for granted here, but they have to come to New Orleans as kind of their touchstone, and they live here and they love it, and and they bring that experience around the world, and everybody else appreciates them. Our closing.
It reminds me a lot of you've never been. I don't know if you've ever been, but it reminds me a lot of Edinburgh during the festival. That everywhere you go, there's street performers and entertainment and stuff going on.
Reading what you've written about that, I am dying to go to that. That just sounds absolutely spectacular.
It's great, but it's only 1 month a year. It's not all year round like New Orleans.
Yeah, New Orleans is all year round, and on the music end of it as well. At our closing reception, we featured James Rivers, who's a guy who's in his 80s now, but he can play anything that you can blow wind into. He plays Amazing Grace on the bagpipes, and if it doesn't bring tears to your eyes, you have no soul. I swear it's unbelievable. It's transcendental, and I have gotten him for the past few years, and I am getting him as long as he can play. But that's a real overlooked feature, I think, of our event, is just to see him. He's actually Clint Eastwood's favorite musician. He wrote the score for Bridges of Madison County and some other stuff for his movies. But he's really, at his age, he's one of the most underappreciated and relatively undiscovered musicians out there. And you can see him at the New Orleans Investment Conference.
Oh, wow. You don't know this, but last year I actually sneaked off and did a comedy gig while I was there.
Really?
Yeah. I went into some open spot night and there weren't many people in. There was only like 15 or 20 in the audience, but
really?
I went off and sneaked off and did a gig.
How was it?
It was good. It was just like doing a sort of pub gig in the UK, really. It was kind of a little bit out. It wasn't in the main centre. It was a little bit out, but it was great fun to do.
Well, our speaker coordinator, Alex Goldfinger, used to book comedy acts, and that was, before we hired him to coordinate our speakers, he was corralling comedians. So I think he appreciated the relative calmness of his current job, but he's done some stand-up comedy. And you must have talked to him about that, I think.
Yeah, I didn't know he'd done that, but having dealt with him and seeing how good he was at that, it doesn't surprise me that that's what he used to do.
Yeah.
So let's talk about, and the I was going to say the festival. The conference goes on for 4 days. Is that right? Yeah. 4 days.
Starts on a Wednesday afternoon and runs through Saturday evening with our gala closing reception, and it is packed full of content. 7 o'clock in the morning till 9 o'clock at night. You can always find something that's really enlightening and really brilliant analysis on the markets, and a lot of entertainment and social events and opportunities to mingle with the fellow attendees, because it attracts hundreds of really successful, self-directed investors, really smart people from primarily North America, but really from around the world. And that alone, I think, is worth the price of admission, just your fellow attendees and sharing ideas.
Yeah, I was really impressed with, like, sometimes when you go to conferences where there's a lot of junior companies, junior mining companies especially, there's a sort of history, if you like, of not such good behavior by junior mining companies, misleading investors and that kind of thing. And I was impressed just listening to some of the questions that got asked. I remember thinking, oh, you know what you're talking about, a few times. And I remember thinking, oh, your audience was pretty clued up.
Yeah, they are. We're getting some newbies to the sector, which is encouraging to me because we're getting people who have come over from crypto. Of course, we cover crypto a bit. We're getting people who come over from real estate investing that aren't really familiar with metals mining. They're really the role of gold and silver, how to buy it, how to invest, and then how to leverage these trends in the mining stocks. And I tell people that a company that's exhibiting at the New Orleans Investment Conference, because it's not a cattle call, there's not thousands of people coming up to a company's booth to get a free pin, or something else, and walking by, that the companies that are exhibiting are going to have conversations with real people who know what they're doing. And because of that, because they're going to have less conversations, but better conversations, it's kind of an acid test to the companies themselves. Just by going to the New Orleans conference, they separate themselves from the pack. They demonstrate that it's a smart company, that it's well run, and they can respond to tough questions. They have the answers to those questions because that's what they're going to get from our attendees. So that the quality is really there, both from the attendee standpoint and the exhibiting company.
Good stuff. Okay, now Brien, moving on. It seemed like gold and silver. It's so many.
Frustrating.
Yeah, I mean I can't even articulate it, but so many roads, so many signs are saying gold and silver at the moment, and gold and silver themselves are doing okay. They're sort of going sideways, up a little bit and down a little bit, but the miners are just entrenched. And if I look at the miners versus gold over the last 2 or 3 years, the miners haven't only lagged gold, they've actually fallen where gold has gone up. Yeah. How do you explain that? Is this the eternal rut that they're in? Is this going to change? What do you make of it all?
Well, I'm a bit more optimistic than you. I think not just personality wise, but based on the evidence as well. The markets don't care, investors don't care what the price of anything is. We have pretty healthy prices, especially for gold right now, historically. But the markets don't care about where the price is, they care about where it's going. And we have not had a consistent uptrend. We've teased and a breakout to all-time highs of the past couple of years. We actually put in a triple top on the gold price, right below the all-time record of around, I guess, 2063 or so on the spot price. But we haven't broken through yet. Now, from a technical standpoint, and I'm not a really accomplished market technician, but this is pretty obvious to me and anyone else that we formed a big cup and saucer, cup and handle formation technically. And the triple top is forming the handle part of that cup. Now, if you extend that from a technical standpoint, it projects to a price somewhere above $3,000 in the gold price, which sounds great, but that's only about a 33% gain from current levels. And that speaks to another thing that I tell people and why I think this is really a generational opportunity in the metals, but especially in the junior mining stocks. Because, if you look at the last time that the mining stocks were as bombed out as they are now, as cheap as they are right now, was in the 1999-2000 double bottom in gold. Now, back then, gold bottomed at $252 an ounce because central banks were selling it hand over fist, the Bank of England, most notably so. And so the metals price was at rock bottom, and of course, so are the mining stocks. Now, it took a couple of years of sustained uptrend in the gold price before the mining stocks really started going. And then we had about a decade of just tremendous, really life-changing gains in the junior mining stocks. Today, the mining stocks are as bombed out as they were back then, but gold is within about 7 or 8% of an all-time high. So today, I don't think we need 2 years of an uptrend to get the mining stock started. I think we need about 2 weeks, literally just that, for a couple of reasons. The mining stock sector is, speculators rush to it when the macro picture is right, when the metals prices are rising. So you get this fear of missing out factoring in, and then it really responds quickly. But if gold puts in a couple of weeks of an uptrend, which I think it will fairly soon, it will be predicting the next big thing from the Fed. And that next big thing is going to be rate cuts, because this rate hiking cycle has peaked. And I think gold, I think the bond market, I think they're kind of feeling ahead and getting ready or starting to price in that essential fact that we're not going higher or much higher. And the next big development is going to be downward in interest rates driven by central banks.
Are you sure? Why do you say that?
Well, I don't know why I say that, other than the fact, I mean, I don't know what the precipitating event will be. I think there's lots of candidates out there, but it is just the rhythm of the markets. It's the rhythm of the central bank fueled markets. We've had, since the early 1980s, the markets have been increasingly driven by central bank policies that were not just easy money, but ever easier money. So they always lowered interest rates to ever lower levels. 2008 came along, they went straight to rock bottom, and then they came up with quantitative easing and TARP and a lot of other acronyms and programs. Then came COVID, and they did everything they did for the great financial crisis, but to a much greater degree and much more quickly, and really multiplied those efforts. So the way things are happening now, they will have another crisis, one really spawned by central bank policy at some point, and then they will have to revert to the same old script, the same prescription. They will have to come out with easy money that's not just easy, but so much easier, so much more dramatic, with so much more shock and awe than what they did before, that it's just going to blow your mind. Now, what will drive that? Will it be the recession that seems likely down the road? I think it won't be just a ordinary recession, a run-of-the-mill recession that'll push them to do that. I think it's going to be pretty extreme. I think the Fed wants a recession, wants to kill off that labor market in the U.S., but they better be careful what they ask for, because there's a lot of factors out there, primarily corporate debt resetting at far, far higher rates, that I think could bring on a recession that's much deeper and much more dramatic than anything they're expecting. And there are a lot of other things. There's the rekindling of the banking crisis that seems very possible. There's a soaring cost of servicing the federal debt. We're paying about $1 trillion in interest right now on a gross basis to service the federal debt. I think that's kind of a tipping point. I don't think that rates can remain this high for much longer without really cratering the federal budget. I mean, it's already eclipsed defense spending in the U.S. It is just about the single largest line item in the budget right now, just interest on the federal debt.
Let me describe something to you and see what you make of it. In the 1930s, gold stocks did extremely well.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the reasons for that is that it was illegal for Americans to own gold.
Exactly.
So the next best thing was owning homestake or whatever it was.
Mm-hmm.
In the 1970s, Americans couldn't own gold until 1975. So again, the next best thing in the early part of the decade was gold stocks. And then if they wanted gold and leverage, again, the best thing was gold stocks.
Yeah.
But in the noughties, after about 2005, we got GLD, the ETF. We also got the invention of gold money, bullion vault, gold core, pure gold company, all those places where you could buy gold online and store it. There were also options, futures, various kinds of warrants, CFDs, spread bets. There were all sorts of different ways by which you could play the gold price.
Yeah.
And there were so many ways to play the gold price that the miners, you were like, well, why do I need to take any kind of company risk? So that all drew capital away from the gold miners. What is going to draw capital back to the gold miners?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and one I've made as well, that there's so many different ways to leverage that macro trend. I tell people you need to invest, you need to own gold and silver as wealth insurance. So you have an insurance aspect of it. But if you think the macro picture argues for much higher metals prices, then you need to go to the mining stocks as to leverage that macro trend. But we've seen the emergence, and not just crypto, which is not obviously directly related to metals prices, but is a way to speculate.
Yeah, that's certainly drawn speculative capital away as well.
Yeah, and I think that's what the majority of the demand that is drawn from gold has been speculative, and that's a way to leverage the broader trend of depreciating currencies. So yeah, that, but also ETFs. You can buy the ETFs and the physical trust on leverage, on margin. You can also buy ETFs like Nugget or Dust. Either way, they give you 2x leverage on a gold price move, and you can buy those on margin, so you can really lever up. So there has been some real competition. I think I go back to that FOMO thing that I talked about, that a lot of these trends in the producers have prompted or incented the producers to invest less in exploration and development, so that you have a supply crunch now, because you have about 15 years of really low investment in the industry in exploring and developing new deposits. So you have supply crunch coming up. You also have a demand curve coming up that's very steep, not just for gold and silver for monetary reasons, but also for a lot of the base metals for many other reasons, like EVs and electrification of transportation, et cetera. So that, I think, is going to demand much higher metals prices, and the mining stocks will be forced to rise, and I think at a rate that's going to exceed what you can get from these alternative investments. These alternative options came about during periods when you really weren't getting mining stocks that were doubling and tripling in price, as we've seen in the early 2000s, or juniors that were going up 10 or 20 times in price, as we've seen on occasion, and actually in early 2000s fairly frequently. So once you get those kinds of gains going, I think it's actually going to bring in more speculative demand from these other sectors because of that fear of missing out. Word gets around pretty quickly. And when a rising tide is lifting all boats and therefore mitigating your downside, and you're getting some of these companies that are going up 4, 5, 10 times in value, that naturally attracts money. And there's more money out there today than there was back then in the old days, and more money looking for that kind of leverage. So I think, as with just about everything in the space, higher prices solve a lot of problems, and rising prices solve a lot of problems.
A bull market's going to cause a bull market.
Yeah, it will. It will, to the point where it creates a bear market. The high prices are the father of bear markets, and vice versa.
Yeah. All right. Well, Brien, thanks very much for coming on the show, and thanks very much for sharing your wisdom. Why don't you give out your website address one more time? As I say, I'll put a link to it in the description, but give it out orally as well.
It is NewOrleansConference.com. NewOrleansConference.com. Very simple.
Good stuff. And do you want to plug your newsletter as well?
I'll plug anything and everything that I have for sale, Dominic. Thank you. Yeah, Gold Newsletter. Gold Newsletter is the oldest precious metals advisory in the world. It was actually started on the day that Nixon closed the gold window in 1971 by my late mentor, Jim Blanchard. And that is goldnewsletter.com. And we cover metals, mining, macro, and mining stocks.
Great stuff. Well, Brien Lundin, thanks so much for talking to me, and I will see you in about a month and a half. I can't wait.
Looking forward to it. Thank you so much, Dominic.